Why did she choose the seat farthest from the briefing table, where the light barely reached? No one asked her name when she entered the operations hall. They barely looked up. 40 steel chairs, most already filled with men in crisp uniforms, mission patches stitched like trophies onto their shoulders. She wore none. Just a plain blue t-shirt beneath a faded field jacket, sleeves pushed up, boots scuffed by years of terrain no one here had walked. Her hair was tied back without care for symmetry. Functional. Invisible. Someone muttered that logistics must have sent the wrong person again. Another voice followed, amused. Is she lost, or just early for janitorial sweep? A few chuckles rippled across the room. Quiet, controlled, the kind that doesn't want to be noticed by command but still needs to be heard. She didn't react, just sat down, back straight, hands folded, eyes forward. Her name was Captain Mara Hale, though not a single person in that room used it yet. To them, she was an anomaly. No medals displayed, no swagger, no stories volunteered over burnt coffee, just a woman who didn't fit the picture they'd already decided mattered. The colonel entered moments later, conversation dying on contact. Screens lit up behind him. Satellite imagery, coordinates blurred for security. A red circle pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Operation Iron Wake, the colonel said. Target, a covert arms broker operating out of the northern corridor. High civilian density, one chance. Mara listened, every word, every pause. The colonel continued. We've lost 2 teams already trying to get eyes inside. The target anticipates brute force. We need precision. Someone leaned back and crossed his arms. So why is she here? The question wasn't hostile. Worse, it was dismissive. The colonel didn't answer immediately. He scanned the room instead, letting the silence stretch. Then he nodded once. She's here because she designed the contingency none of you noticed. Mara felt the shift before she saw it. Chairs creaked, heads turned. But she didn't look up yet. Because there was something they didn't know, not yet. The first simulation ran. A breach attempt, failure, casualties projected. A second approach, same result, a third, worse. Frustration grew loud. This intel is garbage, someone snapped. Mara raised her hand. It took a second before the colonel noticed. Yes, Captain. She stood calm, no rush. The problem isn't the entry point, she said. It's the assumption that the target is stationary. A few scoffs. Someone whispered, here we go. She ignored them. He relocates every 48 hours. Same pattern, same radius, but you're all watching the buildings. You should be watching the pauses between them. She walked forward without asking permission, tapping the screen once. A narrow alleyway lit up, barely visible. Silence fell, not agreement, but curiosity. The colonel nodded, continue. She did, methodical, clear, no theatrics. By the time she sat back down, no one was laughing. But respect, not yet. After the briefing, the room fractured into clusters of voices. Mara stayed seated. A lieutenant passed behind her and murmured, "You don't look like field command." Another added, louder this time, "Hope she's not riding point." She pretended not to hear, pretended her chest didn't tighten. Because she'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't something you defended with words. It was something you carried until it was undeniable. The deployment window closed fast. Helicopters lifted under moonless sky. The terrain below was unforgiving. Mountains cut like broken glass. Wind clawed at the fuselage. Mara checked her rifle, again, then once more. Across from her, a sniper named Cole watched her with thinly veiled doubt. "You ever actually pulled trigger outside a simulator?" he asked. She met his gaze, held it. "Yes." "That all you got?" "Yes." He snorted and looked away. He didn't see the way her fingers stilled after that, the way her jaw set. Because the truth was heavier than any insult. She'd been here before. Different desert, different night, different team. Same outcome. The insertion went quiet, too quiet. They moved through shadows, breath measured, boots memorizing stone. Everything was textbook until it was. A shot rang out, not close, but close enough. They froze. Then chaos unfolded the way it always does. Fast, disorienting, unfair. The target wasn't where intel said he'd be. Cole swore under his breath. Another man panicked. A third hesitated. Mara didn't. She moved. Through smoke, through confusion, through the narrow corridor she'd marked days earlier. She reached the overlook just as the convoy below slowed. Her heartbeat settled, training took over. One shot clean, final. The radio crackled, target down. Silence followed, heavy, unbelieving. Extraction was messy but successful. No casualties. Back at base the mood shifted, subtle, awkward. Cole found her alone near the hangar later. He didn't smile, didn't joke. "I was wrong," he said. She nodded once, nothing more. Because vindication never felt as good as people expected. Days later, command assembled again. This time her chair was closer to the table. The colonel spoke plainly. Iron Wake succeeded because someone here saw what others refused to. Eyes turned toward her, not with suspicion now, but something like recognition. Still, she felt no triumph, just exhaustion. Because missions end, but consequences linger. That night alone in her quarters, she stared at the ceiling. Memories surfaced uninvited, faces she couldn't save, orders she'd followed, silence she'd survived. She wondered when strength stopped feeling like armor and started feeling like weight. Weeks passed, her name appeared in reports, then commendations. She didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, she returned to the corridor alone, walked the same path, listened to the wind. Because redemption, she knew, wasn't public. It was private, quiet, earned without witnesses. The final debrief came months later. The colonel stood beside her this time, not ahead. "You taught them something," he said. She shook her head. "They taught themselves." He smiled faintly. "You never correct them when they underestimate you." She looked out at the horizon. "No," she said, "I let them finish." The sun dipped low, shadows stretched long. And somewhere between silence and resolve, her story settled, not as a legend but as a truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her hands start shaking only after the helicopter lifted off? No one noticed it at first. They were too busy talking over each other, replaying the mission like a highlight reel, claiming angles and moments that hadn't quite been theirs. The cabin smelled of oil, sweat, and adrenaline slowly cooling into something heavier. Mara kept her eyes on the metal floor, boots braced, fingers laced together so tightly her knuckles paled beneath the grime. She waited for the tremor to pass. It always came late, not during the breach, not when the shot broke the night, not when the radio confirmed the kill. Her body had learned when fear was useful and when it wasn't allowed to exist. Now that the danger had stepped back, it demanded payment. Across from her, Cole laughed at something another operator said, too loud, too sharp. The sound scraped at her nerves. She swallowed, forcing her breathing into count. 4 in, 4 out, just like she'd been taught, just like she taught herself again after no one else bothered. The helicopter banked, lights of the forward base appearing like scattered embers below. She felt the familiar pull in her chest, not relief, not pride, but the quiet ache of knowing she'd done what was required and would still carry it alone. When they touched down, boots hit ground fast, orders barked, gear unloaded. The machine spun back into the dark as if eager to forget them. Myra lingered a second too long. "Captain Hale." She turned. The colonel stood a few steps away, hands behind his back, eyes sharp but not unkind. "You good?" She considered the question, measured it. "Yes, sir." He studied her like he might argue, then nodded. Debrief in 40. She watched him walk away, then finally released her hands. Blood rushed back into her fingers, painful and grounding. Inside the debrief room, the tone was different now. Still controlled but less dismissive. Screens glowed with mission data. The same men who'd questioned her presence leaned forward when she spoke, scribbling notes, asking for clarification. Not respect exactly, but attention. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt fragile, conditional. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped back. Conversations resumed. Someone clapped Cole on the shoulder. Another joked about drinks later. No one invited her. She didn't wait to see if they would. Her quarters were small, Spartan. A bed, a desk, a locker. No photos on the walls, no souvenirs. She learned early not to anchor herself to places that could vanish overnight. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her rifle case. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then the memories crept in. A different briefing room, years ago. Her first deployment. She'd worn her uniform like armor back then, sharp creases, boots polished to reflection. She'd believed competence would be enough. She remembered the way a senior officer had looked past her, addressing the man beside her instead. Remembered the way she'd been told, gently, almost kindly, that she was too valuable to risk forward. Valuable. Invisible. That mission had gone wrong, very wrong. She closed her eyes. The sound of gunfire echoed too easily. The smell of dust and copper. A voice on the radio screaming her name, then cutting out mid-syllable. She reached the position too late. Always too late. She'd carried that weight quietly ever since. Not guilt exactly, something colder. A vow carved into bone, never hesitate again. A knock broke the spiral. She opened the door to find Cole standing there, helmet under his arm, expression uncertain. "Look," he said, clearing his throat. "Some of us are heading to the mess. Thought you might." "No," she said, not unkindly. He nodded like he'd expected it. "Right, just good shooting." She met his eyes. It wasn't about the shot. He frowned. What was it about then? She hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because saying it out loud made it real. "Not being wrong," she said finally. He didn't understand, but he didn't push. After he left, she locked the door and leaned her forehead against it, letting the cool metal seep into her skin. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did after a mission. Her mind replayed every second, searching for mistakes that hadn't happened, alternate paths she hadn't taken. When she finally drifted off, it was shallow and restless. Morning brought a summons. Command wanted her, alone. The walk down the corridor felt longer than it should have. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her reflection flickered in glass panels, face drawn, eyes steady, shoulders squared by habit. Inside the office, the colonel wasn't alone. A civilian stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. Older, gray at the temples, no insignia. "Mara Hale," the colonel said. "This is Dr. Rowan." She nodded, "Sir." Dr. Rowan turned, eyes sharp and assessing. "You don't look like your file." She waited. "Sit," the colonel said. They didn't waste time. Rowan spoke plainly. "We're building a unit, small, quiet, off the books in all the ways that matter. We need operators who don't need recognition to function." Mara listened, heart rate steady. "You come highly recommended," he continued. "Not for your kill count, for your restraint." She almost laughed at that, almost. "Why me?" she asked. Rowan's gaze didn't waver. "Because you know what it's like to be underestimated, and you didn't let it turn you bitter." The words landed heavier than expected. The colonel folded his hands. "This isn't a promotion, no ceremony, no guarantees. It will cost you." Mara thought of the empty walls of her quarters, the nights she spent alone with memories no one asked about, the way she'd learned to disappear in plain sight. "I'm already paying," she said. Rowan smiled faintly. Good answer. They dismissed her with instructions to think it over. 24 hours. She didn't need that long. Still she walked, out past the hangars, toward the perimeter where the ground sloped down into scrub and rock. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised colors. She sat on a concrete barrier and let herself feel it, the fear, the doubt, the quiet hope she didn't like acknowledging. Joining the unit meant stepping further into shadow, fewer rules, fewer witnesses, less room for mistakes. It also meant something else, a chance to shape outcomes before they bled. Her radio crackled, a routine check-in. She answered automatically, then shut it off and looked at the horizon again. She thought of the girl she'd been when she first signed up, thought of how badly she'd wanted to matter. She mattered now, not because they said so, but because she knew it. The next morning, she stood in the colonel's doorway. "I'm in," she said. Rowan nodded once, like he'd never doubted it. As she left the office, a strange calm settled over her. Not relief, not excitement, something steadier. Purpose. She returned to her quarters and began packing. Light, efficient, only what she needed. At the bottom of her locker, she found an old patch she'd never sewn on. A unit that no longer existed. People who didn't come back. She held it for a moment, then placed it carefully in her bag. Not as a reminder of failure, but of why silence sometimes mattered more than applause. Because the missions ahead wouldn't care who doubted her. And neither would she. Why did the briefing room feel colder the moment the door locked behind her? Mara noticed it immediately. Not the temperature, the absence of sound. No idle chatter, no casual glances. Just 5 people seated around a steel table, faces half-lit, names unspoken. No ranks displayed. No unit patches. Even the clock on the wall had been removed. Dr. Rowan stood at the far end, tablet in hand. "From this point forward," he said, "you don't exist the way you used to." Mara didn't shift in her chair. She had already felt that truth settling into her bones the moment she said yes. A screen flickered on. Satellite imagery, a coastal city, dense, ordinary, alive. "This is where things get complicated," Rowan continued. "Our target isn't a man with a weapon. It's a decision with consequences." Mara leaned forward slightly. The mission wasn't a strike. It was prevention. An extraction of information buried inside a network no one could touch without lighting the fuse. The kind of operation that failed quietly or never ended at all. She listened as roles were assigned: analyst, handler, ghost transport, and then Rowan looked directly at her. "You'll be eyes forward." No hesitation, no qualifiers. Her chest tightened, not with fear, with recognition. Training began immediately. No ceremony, no bonding speeches, just repetition, correction, silence. The others were skilled, sharp, but guarded. No one volunteered stories. No one asked questions that weren't operational. At night, Mara lay awake in her bunk, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering if this was what she'd been preparing for all along. Not the missions, the solitude. One evening, during a simulation, something went wrong. The scenario was simple: urban observation, identify pattern shifts, flag anomalies. Mara saw it before the system did: a delay in signal bleed, a pause that didn't belong. She spoke up. The analyst dismissed it: noise. She pressed: "It's intentional." Rowan watched silently. The simulation ended with a failure cascade: asset compromised, mission scrubbed. The room stayed quiet. Then Rowan replayed the feed, slowed it, highlighted the pause. "Captain Hale saw it," he said. "Why didn't you?" No one answered. After that, they stopped questioning her instincts, not because they trusted her, but because ignoring her had consequences. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into routines that stripped time of meaning. Mara learned the rhythm of the unit: when to speak, when to wait. She noticed who flinched at sudden noise, who avoided eye contact when pressure mounted. She noticed herself too. How little it took now to slip into focus, how distant the rest of the world felt, how silence no longer pressed in on her chest, it steadied her. The mission window approached. This time there was no helicopter insertion, no visible movement, just a slow infiltration through systems and shadows. Mara would be inside the city, alone, posing as something forgettable. Plain clothes, blue t-shirt, faded jacket. Invisible again. The irony didn't escape her. On the ground, the city breathed around her, street vendors calling out, music drifting from open windows, life continuing, unaware of the pressure points threaded through it. She took a seat at a cafe across from the building marked only by coordinates, ordered tea she wouldn't drink, watched reflections in the glass. Hours passed. Then she felt it. Not danger, not movement. A shift. She adjusted her posture slightly, hand brushing the strap of her bag. Her heart rate didn't change, but something inside her tightened. Someone was watching the watchers. She fed the information back through the smallest channel available, a whisper through layers of static. Pattern deviation, she murmured. Secondary observer unidentified. The response came slow, careful. Hold. She hated that word. Because holding meant waiting, and waiting meant trusting others not to miss what she saw. She stayed still, sipped her untouched tea, counted breaths. The man appeared in her peripheral vision. Average height, unremarkable face, the kind you forgot the moment you looked away. He sat 2 tables over. Didn't look at her. That was the mistake. Mara stood and left exactly when she was supposed to. No rush, no glance back. The man followed. She led him down streets that narrowed and widened, crowds thinning then thickening. She felt his distance change, testing. At a crosswalk she stopped short. He nearly bumped into her. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, his expression slipped. Recognition. She smiled apologetically and stepped aside. He walked on. Her pulse finally ticked upward. She keyed her mic. He knows. Static, then Rowan's voice low. Exfil route delta, now. She didn't run. She moved like someone with nowhere urgent to be. That was the hardest part, resisting the instinct to hurry, to escape. A vehicle passed too slowly, wrong plates. Her breath stayed even. She turned a corner and slipped into a service stairwell. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded far too loud. Inside, the walls were bare concrete. The air smelled of dust and oil. She descended 2 flights, paused and listened. Footsteps above. She drew her weapon but didn't raise it. Because killing him would solve nothing, and everything. She waited until the footsteps stopped. Then she moved. The extraction point was a nondescript apartment. The door opened before she knocked. Inside, Rowan watched her like she was data resolving into truth. You were right, he said. She removed her jacket, hands steady now. He wasn't supposed to be there. No, Rowan agreed, which means someone else is closer than we thought. Mara leaned against the wall, the delayed tremor finally reaching her hands. This is what it's going to be, isn't it? She asked quietly, seeing things before they break, and knowing no one will thank us for stopping them. Rowan considered her. Do you need thanks? She shook her head. No. What she needed was simpler, harder. To believe that staying silent didn't mean being erased. That choosing restraint over recognition didn't make her smaller. That the weight she carried meant something. Later, alone again, she washed her hands in the small sink, watching the water run clear. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, focused, unapologetic. She realized then that she wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. She was choosing when to be. And that choice, Quiet, deliberate, unannounced, felt like the truest power she'd ever known. Why did the silence after extraction feel heavier than the danger she just walked away from? Mara noticed it the moment the door closed behind her. The apartment settled into stillness, the kind that pressed inward instead of opening space. No engines, no radios, no city noise bleeding through the walls, just her breathing, finally uneven now that she allowed it to be. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, boots still on, weapon resting across her knees. Her hands shook again. Harder this time. She didn't fight it. She let the tremor run its course, a private reckoning her body demanded after borrowing calm for too long. Rowan hadn't followed her inside. That was intentional. In this unit, space was a form of respect. Minutes passed before her breathing slowed. When she stood, the mirror above the sink caught her reflection again. Same face, same eyes, but something had shifted. The woman looking back at her no longer expected relief to come from survival alone. She packed quickly. By the time the transport arrived, she was already distant, the city shrinking behind her as if it had never held her at all. Back at the safe site, the mood was restrained. No congratulations, no reassurances, just quiet acknowledgement. The analyst avoided her gaze. The handler nodded once stiffly, like someone learning a new rule they didn't like but couldn't ignore. Rowan briefed them later that night. "We've confirmed internal compromise," he said. "Someone close, someone patient." No one asked who. Because the truth sat heavy between them. The danger wasn't outside anymore. Training intensified, trust thinned. Mara felt it in small ways. Conversations stopping when she entered. Questions weighed before being asked. Not hostility, caution. She was the one who noticed things, and people feared being the thing she noticed next. She didn't blame them. During one drill, the analyst fed her faulty data. Subtle, a decimal shifted, a timestamp delayed by seconds. She caught it. Didn't call it out. Instead, she adjusted her movement, compensating silently. The scenario resolved cleanly. Afterward, Rowan pulled her aside. "You saw it." "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything?" She considered the question. Because sometimes people need to reveal themselves without being forced. Rowan studied her longer than usual. That's a dangerous way to think. "So is pretending loyalty is permanent," she replied. He didn't disagree. That night she couldn't sleep, not because of fear, because of clarity. She realized then that her role wasn't just observation. It was endurance, staying present long enough for truth to surface, carrying uncertainty without demanding resolution. It was lonely work. The next mission came without warning. A border region, mountainous, politically fragile, the kind of place where mistakes echoed for decades. She would be embedded with a local unit, advisors, not command. "Keep a low profile," Rowan said. "You're there to assess, not intervene." Mara nodded, already knowing she would intervene anyway if it came to that. Some instincts didn't wait for permission. The journey in was long and quiet. Dusk coated everything. The air thinned. The local commander barely acknowledged her presence, addressing questions to the male officers beside her. She let him. On the third day, the convoy stopped unexpectedly. An ambush unfolded not with gunfire but confusion, orders overlapping, radios crackling. A vehicle stalled in the worst possible position. Mara watched it unravel in seconds. She acted before anyone else did. Redirected, pulled a driver clear, repositioned without raising her voice. When shots finally came, they were scattered, ineffective. The convoy moved again. Later, the commander approached her. His tone was different now. "You saw it coming." "Yes." "You didn't say anything." She met his gaze evenly. "You wouldn't have listened." He didn't argue. That night, as the camp settled, a young soldier sat near her fire, nervous, barely trained. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "how do you stay so calm?" She thought about the question longer than he expected. "I don't," she said finally. "I just don't let it decide for me." He nodded, absorbing that like doctrine. The next morning the compromised analyst was gone, reassigned, quietly removed. No announcement, no confrontation. Mara felt no satisfaction, only a dull acceptance. This was how it worked. Truth surfaced slowly and rarely with applause. Weeks later, back at base, Rowan handed her a thin folder. "Your evaluation," he said. She didn't open it. "What happens now?" she asked. Rowan exhaled. "Now you keep doing what you do, and others learn to adjust." She considered that, and if they do, then they won't last, he said simply. She walked out into the late afternoon sun. The air was warm, ordinary. For the first time in a long while, she felt tired in a way that wasn't hollow. That night she allowed herself one small indulgence. She sat alone on the steps outside the barracks and watched the sky darken. No radio, no alerts. Just breathing. She thought of the people who'd underestimated her, the ones who still did, the ones who always would. And she realized something quietly profound. Their doubt had never been the obstacle. Her silence had never been weakness. It had been space, space to observe, to choose, to act when it mattered. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped trying to be understood. And in that surrender, she'd found something steadier than approval. She'd found herself. The night settled fully, stars sharp against the dark. Mara stood, squared her shoulders, and went back inside. There was work to be done. And she was ready to carry it unseen, uncelebrated, unbroken. Why did the warning come from the one place she never expected, her own intuition turning against her? Mara felt it before the message arrived, a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with pattern. She was halfway through a routine review when the thought cut through her focus like a hairline fracture spreading through glass. Something was wrong. Not externally, not yet. The systems were clean, the reports aligned, the unit moved with practiced efficiency, but the rhythm felt off, like a familiar song played half a beat too slow. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closed, listening past the noise. She'd learned to trust this sensation the hard way, learned that dismissing it cost more than believing it ever did. The message came seconds later, encrypted, high priority. Rowan wanted to see her, immediately. The walk to his office felt heavier than usual, not tense, weighted, like gravity had subtly increased. When she entered, Rowan didn't look up right away. He was staring at a paused video frame on his screen. "Tell me what you see," he said. She stepped closer. The footage showed a familiar training room, a recent session, her session. She watched herself move through the space, efficient, controlled, distant. "Pause," she said. Rowan froze the frame. "There," she murmured, "that hesitation, not mine." Rowan exhaled slowly. "You noticed it too." "Who?" "That's the problem," he replied. "We don't know." The unit had been observed, not from outside. From within the blind spots they assumed were empty. Data moved when it shouldn't. Logs corrected themselves. Someone was shaping outcomes quietly, carefully. Just like her. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Are you asking if it's me?" she asked calmly. Rowan finally looked at her, really looked. "If I were, you'd already know." She nodded once. They didn't speak for a while. Then Rowan said, "You've become essential. That makes you vulnerable." "I've always been vulnerable," she replied. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." He slid a thin file across the desk. "You're being reassigned, temporarily." She didn't open it. To where? Nowhere visible. Her jaw tightened, not in anger, in understanding. They were pulling her back before someone decided to push her out. The reassignment stripped her of movement, of missions, of purpose as she'd come to define it. She became an observer again, but this time without proximity to action. The silence returned, deeper, sharper. Days passed, then weeks. She trained alone, reviewed footage no one else wanted to analyze, found anomalies that led nowhere, or worse, led back to people she trusted. She slept less, thought more. At night, memories resurfaced uninvited, faces she hadn't allowed herself to grieve, choices she'd made because hesitation would have killed more than certainty ever did. She wondered briefly if this was how it ended, not with failure, but with irrelevance. The thought scared her more than she wanted to admit. One evening, as she ran drills in an empty gym, Rowan appeared at the doorway. "They've made a move," he said. Her heart steadied instantly. Where? Financial, political, not kinetic yet. She wiped sweat from her hands. "And you bench me because—" "Because they expect you to react," Rowan said, "and I need to know if you can wait." She met his gaze. "I've been waiting my whole career." He nodded. "Then you know what comes next." The next phase wasn't glamorous, it was slow, painfully so. She embedded herself in records, personnel histories, behavioral shifts. She mapped loyalty the way others map terrain, looked for pressure fractures, tiny compromises made too easily. And then she saw it. A name that appeared in just enough places to seem helpful, reliable, unremarkable. The handler. Not malicious, just tired, overlooked, passed over too many times. Mara understood that kind of fracture intimately. She brought it to Rowan without accusation, just data. He listened, then said quietly, "If you're wrong." "I won't be," she replied. They watched, waited. The handler made one mistake, small, human. And that was enough. When the truth surfaced, it didn't explode. It collapsed inward, quiet arrests, reassignments, damage contained. No headlines, no speeches. When it was over, Rowan found her standing alone outside the operations wing. "You could have exposed it sooner," he said. She nodded, "but then we wouldn't know how deep it went." "And now we do." He studied her, something like regret flickering across his face. "This work is taking something from you." She considered that. "It already took the parts I couldn't afford to keep." Silence settled between them. Then Rowan said, "There's talk of formalizing the unit, visibility, structure." Her stomach tightened. That would ruin it. "It would protect it," he countered. She shook her head. "From what? Accountability or discomfort?" He didn't answer. That night she sat alone again, watching the lights across the base flicker on one by one. She felt older than her years, not from wear, from awareness. She thought about what it meant to lead, not command, but guide, influence without imprinting ego. She realized she didn't want a title. She wanted continuity. The next morning, she made her decision. She found Rowan early, before the day could complicate things. "I'm stepping back," she said. He frowned. "You just stabilized everything." "Exactly," she replied. "That's when you leave, before the work becomes about you." He searched her face. "What will you do?" She shrugged lightly. "Teach, observe, be available." "And when we need you?" She met his eyes. "You'll know where to find me." As she walked away, a strange mix of grief and relief washed through her. She was letting go of the sharp edge that had defined her, not because she was broken, but because she trusted the foundation she'd helped lay. Later, alone in her quarters one last time, she packed slowly, thoughtfully. She left the old patch behind. Not as rejection, as closure. Because some chapters aren't meant to be reread. They're meant to be understood. And then released. Why did walking away feel harder than every mission she'd ever survived? Mara felt it in the quiet that followed her final steps out of the operations wing. No alarms, No radios crackling her name, just the echo of boots on concrete fading into something she wasn't sure how to define yet. Freedom, maybe, or loss. The two often wore the same shape. She hadn't told many people she was leaving. There was no ceremony for exits like hers, no formation, no speech, just a cleared badge and a door that opened without resistance. The world beyond the base felt louder than she remembered. Wind through trees, distant traffic, life continuing without any awareness of the invisible work that kept it intact. She paused, letting it wash over her, grounding herself in the ordinary. For the first time in years, no one was waiting for her next move. She took a job that didn't make sense on paper, training consultant, short-term contracts, quiet facilities tucked far from headlines. She taught without uniforms or rank, focusing on fundamentals others rushed past. Observation, restraint, decision-making under uncertainty. Most didn't recognize her name, some never asked. She preferred it that way. Her students came from different units, different backgrounds. Young, confident, sometimes arrogant. She saw herself in them years ago before experience sanded the sharp edges. One afternoon during a scenario exercise, a trainee froze. Not from fear exactly, but overload. Too many inputs, too much pressure. The room waited. Mara didn't raise her voice. She stepped closer and said quietly, "Breathe. Then choose one thing that matters." The trainee nodded, focused, and moved. Afterward, he asked her how she'd learned that. She thought about the question for a long moment. "By choosing wrong when I was younger," she said, "and living long enough to learn from it." At night she walked alone. No weapon, no comms, just her thoughts and the steady rhythm of her steps. The memories still came, but softer now, less accusatory. They no longer demanded penance, only acknowledgement. She learned how to sit with them. Months passed. One evening, Rowan called. "I won't ask you to come back," he said, "but I want you to know what you built is holding." She closed her eyes. Relief moved through her, gentle and unexpected. "That's good." "There's something else," he added. "People are telling your story, not your name, your methods." She smiled faintly. "That's better." After the call, she stood at her window and watched the lights below blink on one by one. Each one a life untouched by the decisions she'd helped shape. That was enough. She thought of the briefing room where she'd once sat unnoticed, of the missions that had tested her silence, of the moment she realized strength didn't need witnesses. The world didn't need her to be visible. It needed her to be steady. Years later, a young woman approached her after a seminar, nervous, determined. "They don't take me seriously," the woman admitted. "I don't fit what they expect." Mara studied her, saw the same quiet fire she'd once carried alone. "Good," she said. "That means you're not limited by their imagination." The woman smiled, uncertainty easing into resolve. That night, Mara walked outside and looked up at the sky, wide, unjudging, the same one she'd crossed so many times chasing outcomes she couldn't control. She no longer needed to prove anything. Not to command, not to history, not even to herself. She learned the hardest lesson of all, not how to endure, but when to let go. Because true strength wasn't about being seen at the center of the storm. It was about knowing when to step aside quietly so others could stand. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And then just as quietly it rests.